What if he actually just said she's a pig? Maybe if he called her Piggy. Or if he said, Natalie Harp, shut up, Piggy. Would that bother you?
Well, I think that calling a political opponent sort of fat or something is a mean thing to do, and Trump uses tough rhetoric. But to call a random private staffer to insinuate that she's sleeping with her boss,
why do you keep
crazy.
Michael? How come it's mean, it's disgusting, and then you say, but Trump is tough rhetoric? He is the most juvenile, disrespectful, rude president in public about and to females than you and I have ever observed in our lives.
When a political operative gets caught in a dead-end hypocritical trap on live television, watch how fast they try to change the subject. Look at your screen. Michael Knowles came onto NewsNation expecting to run a textbook outrage campaign against Senator Jon Ossoff over a jab at a White House staffer. He expected easy head nods. Instead, Chris Cuomo did what far too few network anchors actually do. He stood his ground, called out the blatant double standard to his face, and held the line on basic economic reality. What followed was a complete breakdown of partisan spin. If you are tired of the establishment's double standards and want to help us expose the uniparty playbook every single week, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Let's roll the tape.
Senator Ossoff insinuated that a random White House staffer was sleeping with her boss simply because she was doing her job and is a pretty woman. That is an outrageous claim to make. There is no basis for it whatsoever. It would be nasty to do to a public figure. To do it to a random staffer just because she happens to be a woman who is an assistant to the president, I think is really disgusting. Yes, obviously President Trump uses all sorts of tough rhetoric, and he makes fun of Rosie O'Donnell and all the rest of it. But
Tough rhetoric.
He does use tough rhetoric.
Tough rhetoric is what he does.
I don't think
this isn't tough rhetoric.
Yeah, No, I think what Jon Ossoff is doing is he's calling a White House staffer a whore based on nothing. That is disgusting and should be condemned by both parties.
What if he actually just said she's a pig? Maybe if he called her Piggy. Or if he said, Natalie Harp, shut up, Piggy. Would that bother you?
Well, I think that calling a political opponent sort of fat or something is a mean thing to do, and Trump uses tough rhetoric. But to call a random private staffer to insinuate that she's sleeping with her boss,
why do you keep Michael? How come it's mean, it's disgusting, and then you say, but Trump is tough rhetoric? He is the most juvenile, disrespectful, rude president in public about and to females than you and I have ever observed in our lives. That's not tough rhetoric. Tough rhetoric is what you and I are doing. You don't think it's quite true? He called a reporter Piggy. He just told another one to shut up. He tells them that they're terrible people. He said this stuff about Megyn Kelly having blood coming out of whatever. You know the whole litany. I could go on with over a dozen. You never said anything. Now you're offended.
Chris, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that President Trump plays by the Marquess of Queensberry rules or that he's very clubbable, but clearly there's a distinction, as you just made, between public figures making fun of Hillary Clinton or even a news anchor or a reporter and a private random staff member. Those are totally different levels. The assistant to the president's a public
employee.
Figure. Now she is because of you guys.
No, she works for the White House. She's been vetted. I pay her salary, brother. You and I pay her salary. We have the right to question her and for her to be relevant. And let's just put up what Ossoff said, because this is the part I don't get, Mike, because I'm with you. Nobody should call anybody a whore. Nobody should make any insinuations, okay? Nobody should. But here's the thing. While the sailors on the Lincoln, he's draining the munitions, the oil reserves, the president sleeps through his meetings. He wants to build his ballroom and travel with Natalie on their apparently defenseless flying palace gifted by the Emir. I wonder, because when I read this, I read it as hanging out on the plane doing nothing, okay? Which you can debate.
Give me a break. No, you didn't. No, you didn't, Chris. That's nonsense.
Here's my question. I wonder if you guys default to it being an affair because of who we're talking about. Maybe if this guy had said it about Obama, you wouldn't have taken it as that kind of suggestion. But when you know that that's right in Trump's wheelhouse, maybe that's why you're sensitive to it, because you think it might be true.
Chris, if you think that John Ossoff made this insinuation about a random White House staffer in complete innocence, then I think we need to nominate you to be the next White House press secretary, because that is an amount of spin that any administration of either party could do very good with.
Look, I'm just saying I don't get the outrage, but I will give you this. We're talking about it, so let's now go to another step. I'm not going to make you own the position on the war. I have heard and read what you've been putting out about the war. It was not your call. You don't get where this is going to lead that's any good. Okay, so you're not owning that position. Then there's the primary one, which is, hey, by the way, you want to talk about the economy. The only reason there's price pressure is the war, and the tariffs worked. You think the American people will buy that?
Well, I think it's weak to point to the tariffs for President Trump because the Supreme Court invalidated 75% of the tariffs. I agree. If I were running the Republican campaigns here, I would not campaign on the tariffs for their immediate economic benefit. But the chief economic benefit that you got out of the tariffs, even the ones that were allowed to persist after the Supreme Court struck most of them down, is the decoupling from China. You have the trade deficit with China at a 20-year low, which is crucially important. That's what we learned during COVID. We were far too reliant on China. That is part of the problem in American manufacturing. On top of the tariffs, President Trump raised $17 trillion of new investment in the U.S. economy. So this is why the economy was doing very, very well before the hiccup of the war, which obviously damaged oil markets. 20% of oil going through the Strait of Hormuz was been held up for months. Obviously, that's a big liability. I'm not pretending that it isn't for Republicans in the midterms, but to pretend that the economy wasn't doing well beforehand, I think is insane.
Who's doing that?
I think that the Democrats are doing that. I think that the Democrats are trying to pretend that Trump's economic policies have been terrible.
I think they're saying exactly what you're saying up into Trump. The economy that he inherited was growing robustly. Inflation was moving the right way, and the growth factors were basically moving the right way. You know, we're still in the recovery mode after the pandemic that was there during the president's first term. Then came the tariffs, then came the war, then came the big, beautiful bill effects, which have all been strains and drains on the consumer economy. You own that as the status quo. It's not that the Supreme Court screwed you. The tariffs were obviously illegal. I can't believe they took so much time to decide it. Okay, it was right in the plain reading of the statute. So how do you fight on the economy on this basis?
Well, at least 25% of the tariffs did not violate any laws, even by the most extreme reading, and then the White House had a backstop for many of the others. But regardless of that point on the tariffs, you had the economy doing very, very well. And then in your opening monologue, you alluded to all of the other economic pressures that have been difficult, not the least of which includes the interest rates. So the interest rates have obviously hampered economic growth. That's monetary policy. That's totally outside of Trump's purview.
They're still at historic lows.
You're saying that Sure, but after effectively 0% interest rates for recent memory, you know, anything is a shock to the system. The point on the Biden economy is that you're missing that first year of Trump's term, where you had the stock market at all-time highs, you had good manufacturing signals, things were looking very, very strong.
They're all continuing trends that you inherited.
The key feature, so obviously you don't want to give Trump any credit for the economy that did very, very well until the Iran war, but the key feature I think that distinguishes his economy from the Biden economy is an issue that Republicans can run and win on in the midterm elections, and that is migration, the role of mass migration in challenging wages for the lower middle class, especially in housing. We know that 100% of housing increases in New York and California in the last 5 years were caused by mass migration, 60% nationally. That is a big issue because Joe Biden was letting 3 million illegals in per year in addition to 1 million legal immigrants. President Trump has closed the border to illegal immigration and has deported about 1.5 million illegal immigrants since that time. That will have long-term economic effects, and it's just a matter of justice that the American people desire. That is the issue to run on, not the Iran war, not the tariffs, though there are good defenses of both.
You can run on it. You can run on whatever you want. Immigration certainly was a good issue. I think ICE has greatly compromised the optics and the perspective of whether it's righteous or not. But in terms of the economic effect, I think you got a really big stretch. One, those housing numbers are not going to be a baseline fact analysis. You got that one report out of Dallas that looked at a market that makes sense. It's going to have hyper concentration because it's right on the border. But no. The real reason for housing costs going up on the construction side have been economic, not migratory. And it is a very open question about losing the people that you're throwing out of the country. What will that do to the economy? We already had 7.5 million jobs that were open. Now what?
This is a great point that you bring up, Chris, and I think this is really where Trump is acting very responsibly on the economy. He is making long-term plays that will not necessarily have the short-term payoff. That was always going to be true of the tariffs, and that's especially true when it comes to mass migration. Part of the reason that the Democrats wanted mass migration because they felt it gave them a lot of votes, and the business Republicans wanted mass migration because it allowed them to pay people slave wages. That is wrong in and of itself. It's contrary to the desires of the American people and to sovereignty. So you are going to take a short-term economic hit by deporting the illegal aliens. The American people still voted for that, but I think it actually shows the opposite of your point. I think it shows that Trump is being responsible on the economy. He's setting the stage for a much more stable economy where we haven't outsourced our whole supply chain, and we know who is going to enter, and we can control housing. So, I hope we can make it through the midterms. We have historic political winds working against us, but I think the long-term investment here is pretty clear.
Well, I think that is a good argument, and I think it has a very strong rebuttal, and I hope the midterms are that debate. If we're debating, if you and I have like 5-6 sessions about what's been offered up, where we're talking about the impact of migration and what's going on with the economy, we're in a better place in these midterms than I anticipate. So I will take that argument all day long. I think it'll be great for the American people.
Stop the tape right there. I want to talk about what Chris Cuomo just did, because in a media landscape filled with partisan sycophants, seeing someone actually call out the double standard in real time is a breath of fresh air. Look at how this started. Michael Knowles comes on the show clutching his pearls, acting deeply offended, and calling Ossoff's comments disgusting. He wants you to believe he cares deeply about decorum and respect. So Cuomo looks him dead in the eye and asks the obvious question: where was this outrage for the last 8 years? When Donald Trump calls female reporters piggy, tells journalists to shut up, or hurls crude personal insults at anyone who challenges him, Knowles and the partisan commentary class dismiss it as just tough rhetoric. But the second someone on the other side drops a passive-aggressive line, suddenly, it's an unpardonable sin. Cuomo nailed him dead to the wall. You cannot demand a moral standard for your political opponents that you refuse to hold your own team to. That isn't principle, that is hyper-partisan theater. And Cuomo made another critical point that the political class hates admitting. Natalie Harp isn't just a random private citizen. She is an official White House staffer funded by American tax dollars. As Cuomo rightly put it, I pay her salary, brother. You and I pay her salary. We have every right to scrutinize the people who hold influence inside the executive branch, who travels on official aircraft, and how public resources are being used. You don't get to hide behind the shield of being a private staffer when you're on the public dime. But the moment where Cuomo completely dismantled the script was when they moved to the economy. Knowles tried to dance around the numbers. He blamed the Supreme Court for striking down tariffs, he blamed interest rates, he blamed foreign wars. And then he dropped the most out-of-touch line of the whole segment. He actually argued that working-class Americans should just accept a short-term economic hit and endure labor disruptions and costs for some vague, long-term political experiment. Cuomo wasn't having it. He brought the conversation right back to Main Street reality. Working families aren't abstract data points on a think tank whiteboard. They are the ones paying higher prices at the grocery store. They are the ones feeling the squeeze of interest rates, trade volatility, and economic instability right now. You can't just tell an American family struggling to pay rent that their pain is responsible long-term strategy, while Washington politicians continue to spend trillions and line their own pockets. Cuomo forced Knowles to answer for the status quo instead of letting him hide behind partisan talking points and scapegoats. He showed what actual journalism is supposed to look like, putting pressure on the people in power, rejecting selective outrage, and demanding answers for the everyday taxpayer. The establishment wants you focused on fake moral outrage, so you don't look at the balance sheets. They want you arguing over insults, so you don't demand results. It is time to demand consistency. It is time to hold every single politician, red or blue, to the exact same standard of accountability and economic reality. If you are tired of the partisan double standards and want raw human commentary that actually puts the working class first, hit that subscribe button right now. We tear down the spin and tell the truth every single week. This is Floor Leader Insider, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.